Terror alarms ring across holy Terra, not because a wound opens in the heavens, not because warp fire stains the clouds, but because time itself slips its chain. In the span between one breath and the next, the rhythm of the throne world stutters. The imperial palace stands in its eternal vigilance, the same banners, the same guard rotations, the same sacred routines that have held for 10,000 years. Then the world lurches forward as if a page has been torn from reality. Before we descend into the chaos of this tale, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more legends and dark histories from the Warhammer 40k universe. Chancellor Adept Lyra Kale feels it before any sensor confirms it. A thin, cold pressure behind her augmetic eye, a wrongness measured not in heat or motion but in sequence. Her chronoslates, calibrated to the palace's most holy atomic standards, flicker into contradiction. The machine spirits inside them do not scream in pain, they falter in confusion, as though time has offered them an answer they were never built to compute. Around her, every clock within the Mechanicus chrono archives snaps out of harmony. Pendulums hesitate mid-swing. Digital counters race, then freeze. Even the astronomican's precise pulse feels, for the briefest heartbeat, out of step with itself. Lyra turns toward the outer sanctum, expecting the usual reports of intrusion, expecting a perimeter breach, a psychic flare, a flare of void shields. Instead, she finds a new fact already seated inside the world. One moment the sanctum doors are empty save for sentinel ranks and incense haze. The next, a figure stands there as if the palace has always contained him. Calm, still, draped in armor that carries the quiet weight of distant centuries. A silhouette that does not announce arrival so much as deny that arrival was ever necessary. In one gauntleted hand rests a crystal that seems to drink the light around it, a shard of eternity held with the ease of someone used to deciding where histories end. The air near it feels different, not charged like a weapon, not roiling like warp sorcery, but tight and precise, the way a blade feels before it falls. Lyra's augmetics read nothing familiar, then drown in error, her internal coitators returning the same impossible line again and again, temporal divergence beyond imperial index, causality compromised at source. Across Terra, Vox networks awaken without command. In barracks, chapels, manufactorums, and noble spires, the same voice arrives through every caster at once, deep, measured, carrying neither haste nor threat, only certainty. I am Immortus, your future is unstable, I have come to correct it. The words settle into the throne world like a new law of nature, and Lyra feels the palace hold its breath around her, as though the Immaterium itself has just realized it is being studied from the far side of tomorrow. Far from the sanctum, in the psychic choirs that ring Terra like hidden organs, astropaths feel the shock as a blow from the inside. Not a warp scream, not the familiar taste of demonic pressure, but something colder and sharper, a recoil through the mind as if the past has been yanked in a direction the soul cannot follow. They fall where they stand, hands clawing at empty air, lungs working against a silence that has no sound. The attendants who rush to them find no bleeding, no fire, only eyes wide with the terror of having glimpsed an instant that should not exist. Within the navigator houses, the reaction is worse. Those ancient bloodlines, bred to read the tides of the Immaterium with their third eyes, turn their sight inward and feel the time stream not. The sacred ocular veils that normally protect them from the raw glare of the warp are useless against this. Their third eyes open in reflex and meet a horizon that shifts without warning. Some stagger back, blood wetting the edges of their masks, not from a psychic attack, but from the strain of trying to map a future that is rearranging itself beneath their gaze. They know the warp is wild, but this is different. This is order in motion, a hand turning the wheel before the ship can even feel the current. Lyra stands among the chrono archives as the Mechanicus systems around her drift into dissonance. Machine spirits that have hummed in perfect cadence for millennia lose their place in the hymn. Data looms misaligned by microseconds that cascade into seconds, then minutes, then sudden snaps back into compliance, as though reality is testing combinations and discarding them. It feels like watching a choir forget the next note, then sing it anyway with trembling certainty. Her augmetic eye tracks the ripple through the palace's sacred time lattice, and the pattern that forms is not random, not the chaos of an invasion, but the clean signature of something rewriting sequence itself. This is why the alarm tone is wrong. It is not the howl reserved for orbital breach or demon incursion. It is the chime of systems reporting contradictions they were never built to hold. The Immaterium has faced enemies that break steel, shatter minds, and devour worlds, but this is an enemy that breaks the order of before and after. Terra is not being assaulted from outside, it is being edited from within, and Lyra feels the scale of it settle over her like a shadow moving across the sun, leaving the world colder, quieter, and suddenly uncertain of what comes next. Lyra Kale has lived most of her life inside rules that do not bend. The chrono archives of the Imperial Palace are not merely a workplace, they are a cathedral of sequence, a shrine to the idea that time is a sacred machine and order is proof of divinity. In the vault lanes beneath the palace, thousands of chronometers hum in layered harmony, each one linked to a lattice of measurement older than many worlds. Their pulse aligns with the astronomican's distant throb, with the emperor's silent endurance, with the mechanicus' belief that precision is a form of prayer. Lyra was raised to guard that harmony, to listen for the smallest drift and correct it before it becomes doubt. Her promotion to Chancellor Adept came after 3 decades of service, 2 elective augmentations to expand her temporal cognition, and a vow sealed in binary cant before a dozen red-robed witnesses. She learned to read the long arc of imperial history by the way data settles into patterns, how failures repeat in cycles, how victory and loss braid together into a stubborn continuity. Some among the Adeptus Mechanicus dream of revelation, but Lyra belongs to the colder tradition, the one that insists miracles are only ignorance wearing a crown. A machine's spirit sings because it has been taught to sing, a prophecy holds because numbers can be trusted, and any claim beyond doctrine must be interrogated until it either becomes knowledge or collapses into delusion. Now in the wake of the time stream's shudder, those habits become her only anchor. She stands at the center of the chrono archives, surrounded by cogitator banks that still tremble with confused timestamps, and lets her augmetics roll through the data with calm certainty. She rejects the first panic flutter in her chest, names it an organic error, and pushes it aside. The intruder is inside the outer sanctum, and the palace has never contained a stranger without paying for it. The question is not whether danger exists, but what kind of danger it is, and how it moves. Lyra's inner lenses widen, seeing in layers her natural eye cannot hold. The sanctum air carries no warp pressure, no psychic residue, no shadow of a sorceress breach. The detector arrays she helped design for demonic signatures return nothing but blank clean lines. Her mind reaches for familiar categories, then finds each one unfit. Not a psyker, not a warp entity, not a Xeno's mind hidden behind illusion. The readings around the figure refuse those conclusions as gently as a closed door. Instead, there is something else, a distortion that lives in ordering itself. The chronological lattice of the archives, a system built to catch anomalies in sequence, flags an impossibility in the same moment her augmetic core does. Causality inside the sanctum is no longer linear. The air holds extra echoes of events that have not happened, ghost branches pressing against the present like unseen fingers on glass. The sanctum walls, ancient and unwavering, register microfractures in their time field, not physical damage but adjusted history, as though the stone has briefly belonged to another hour. Her training insists there must be a method, and her mind, sharpened by devotion and fear of error, follows the method deeper. The intruder's presence is not warping reality by psychic force, it is pruning and stitching it by technological means that bypass the warp entirely. A machine can simulate probability, but this is not simulation. The palace itself is being forced to accept a different arrangement of before and after, and it is obeying. That realization settles heavy and quiet. If the intruder is bending cause and effect with tools beyond doctrine, then the Mechanicus faces something they have no right for. Lyra feels the first true chill behind her augment eye, not panic, but the weight of standing at the edge of a new law of nature. She draws a slow breath, lets the data stabilize in her mind, and takes her first step toward the sanctum, carrying with her the sober awareness that every heartbeat from now on may belong to a future someone else has already chosen. Thresholds matter in the imperial palace. Every corridor, every gate, every chamber is layered with meaning and memory, and Lyra knows the outer sanctum as a place where the Immaterium announces what it considers possible. She passes ranks of Skitarii who stare forward without moving because their command loops have entered a waiting state that cannot resolve, and she feels the palace turning inward around her, as if it recognizes a calculus unfolding beyond its own control. When she reaches the sanctum's edge, the figure stands exactly where the palace's geometry suggests a challenge should be met. Immortus does not loom like a warlord. There is no flourish, no blaze of energy, no theatrical proclamation beyond the sentence already delivered to the world. The posture is measured, almost still. A presence that implies arrival was the final step of a long plan. The armor carries the quiet dignity of a being who has walked through many eras and found them all wanting. The forever crystal rests in one hand without strain, and the way its light refracts makes the air feel like it is being looked at from another angle. Lyra hears the voice again, not from Vox Gasters this time, but in the sanctum itself, steady and low, as if sound is a courtesy rather than a tool. Immortus speaks with a restraint that feels more unsettling than rage. The Immaterium is not condemned because it is weak, but because it is trapped. These words come without insult, almost without emotion, like a physician stating a diagnosis before a surgery. 10,000 years of war have hardened humanity into a ritual of survival, but survival has become its own prison. The Emperor's dream, once an engine for ascent, now cycles endlessly through conflict and superstition, each generation inheriting the same wounds and calling them destiny. Lyra expects condemnation of chaos, of Xenos, of traitors. Instead, Immortus lays the blame on the structure itself, on the loop that repeats because no one dares to rewrite the premises. The Immaterium in his sight is a doomed timeline, not doomed by any single enemy, but by the nature of its decay. Administration has become a labyrinth too slow to respond. The Mechanicus has become a mausoleum for lost knowledge. The ecclesiarchy has replaced curiosity with fear of heresy. Even the custodes, so perfect in their loyalty, have become guardians of stasis. It is not cruelty in the voice, it is inevitability, a man reading the future the way a tech priest reads a schematic. He offers no plea for worship. The words come calm, certain, almost merciful in their coldness. A doomed timeline can be pruned, then replanted. A future can be discarded like a flawed blueprint. Immortus declares that he can cut away the path Terra is on, sever it from the knot of suffering that binds it, and replace it with a line of survival. Not utopia, not paradise, but a future that does not collapse under its own contradictions. The tone suggests this is not a dream, but a technical option already tested elsewhere. Lyra feels her augmetics tracking microshifts in local chronology as each sentence lands. The palace itself seems to tighten, the way a machine tightens under a new command. The claim is not a threat in the ordinary sense, not a demand backed by arms, but a claim of authority over sequence. Her mind reaches for counterarguments, then pauses, not because she agrees, but because the logic is coherent in a way that terrifies her. A stranger is naming truths the Immaterium avoids, and offering a cure no doctrine has prepared them to evaluate. Around her, Custod stands silent with spears held ready, and their silence makes the sanctum feel like a trial chamber. Lyra realizes, with a slow sinking weight, that the Imperium is not being asked to surrender territory, it is being asked to surrender ownership of tomorrow. The thought tastes like metal on her tongue. Yet even as resistance stiffens in her chest, a quieter fear rises behind it, the fear that some part of her understands the diagnosis too well. She swallows that fear, holds it close, and waits for what comes next, aware that the claim has already drawn a line through history, and every soul on Terra is now standing on one side of it or the other. Lyra's augmetic eye does what ritual cannot. It strips legend to data, then studies the data until a form emerges. While the sanctum holds its breath, she lets her internal citators compile the spectral readings spilling from the crystal. The object is a paradox in her sensors. It radiates no warp signature, yet it bends the temporal lattice as cleanly as a blade. It throws no heat, yet the air around it compresses into a different density of time. The refraction of light across its surface does not follow known angles. Every measurement suggests a constant unwilling to obey the universe that contains it. Her implanted chronoschematics search their sealed libraries and return a match that should not exist in any imperial registry. The Forever Crystal, a name so alien to Terra's catechisms that it feels like a foreign prayer. Lyra recognizes it not by faith but by the way reality yields to it. She has studied forbidden accounts from the Dark Age, fragments that speak of devices capable of rewriting history, and those fragments always end in warnings of extinction. This artifact is of the same family, but far more refined, a tool of surgical finality rather than indiscriminate ruin. She looks again and sees how Immortus holds it, not like a sword lifted to strike, not like a relic displayed for reverence, but like a seal carried by a judge who is finished listening. The grip is casual, yet the palace reacts to it like a reactor reacts to a new core. Chronometers across Terra do not merely desync, they orient around it, as if something inside the artifact is becoming the default heartbeat to which all other systems must compare themselves. It is a quiet domination, almost polite, and therefore more terrifying. Lyra's mind runs the implication forward with a clarity that makes her throat tighten. If the crystal can affect divergences and wipe entire timelines, then every future Terra might have become contingent on an outsider's choice. It is not the kind of power the Imperium has ever faced directly. Chaos devours, Xenos conquer, traitors corrupt. This artifact does something colder. It edits the ledger of existence. A timeline erased is not a conquered world, not even a dead world. It is a world that never was, a memory no one is allowed to retain. She watches the custods around her shift subtly, not from fear of violence, but from a new kind of dread, the dread of irrelevance. Their spears are forged to protect the Emperor's body. Their oaths are written to stand against intrusion, yet no spear can protect a future that is removed before it arrives. Lyra sees the same unease ripple through the Mechanicus adepts who stand behind her, their mechadendrites twitching in algorithmic panic. Machine spirits cannot pray their way out of non-existence. Terra feels it too. In the Vox networks, reports begin to cascade, each one a variation of the same confession. People across the planet are experiencing false memories of pasts they never lived, or sudden certainty about deaths that have not happened. The Forever Crystal is pressing its presence into the time stream so hard that loose fragments of potential are becoming felt as echoes in mortal minds. The populace does not understand the mechanism, but they know the sensation that the ground of reality has become negotiable. Lyra's logic reaches a conclusion that feels like a verdict in her own chest. Immortus has not come merely with knowledge. He has come holding the ability to delete or redirect the Imperium's entire future as easily as a scribe burns a flawed scroll. The realization is almost too large to hold, yet it is clean and undeniable, a truth made of numbers rather than fear. The crystal is the source of the alarm that does not sound like war. It is the source of the hush that follows Immortus wherever he stands. It is the reason the palace feels smaller around him. She lowers her gaze for a heartbeat, not in reverence, but in the instinctive human response to standing before something that could erase her without effort. When she looks up again, her augmented heart is steady, but the steadiness is not comfort. It is the calm of someone who has understood that the Imperium is no longer arguing over whether it can resist, but over whether it will be allowed to exist at all. That thought passes through her like a slow blade, leaving her colder, sharper, and unwilling to blink as the next move approaches. The sound of armored steps arrives long before the custodes enter the sanctum. It is a rhythm Terra has known since the first days of the Great Crusade, a measured thunder that carries the weight of the Emperor's will. Lyra feels the palace relax by a fraction as the Golden Guardians approach. Their presence is proof that some lines are still held, that some traditions still stand unbroken, even in the face of anomaly. Yet when the custodes pass into view, she sees hesitation in their spacing, the smallest pause between footfalls, the kind that only a mind trained for perfect certainty could notice. Captain General Valorous leads them, helmed, towering, radiating an authority that needs no speech. The Guardian's spear in his hand is a relic of 1,000 wars, its machine spirit old enough to remember a brighter Imperium. Unlike the defense grids and cogitator nets that flinched under Immortus's arrival, these weapons remain obedient only to their bearers. No alien override silences them. No temporal stutter dulls their edge. Their control is proof of the custodes' unique separation from the Mechanicus' wider machine ecosystem. If there is still a place in Terra that cannot be seized by arcane technology, it is the ring of gold around the Eternity Gate. Yet even with that advantage, the custodes do not rush. They form a line between Immortus and the inner palace with ceremonial precision, their spears angled in a posture that says warning before violence. Lyra reads the moment with growing clarity. This is not fear of combat. It is recognition that combat may be irrelevant. Immortus stands before them, not as a barbarian challenging their strength, but as a tactician who has already walked their possible futures in his mind and found the path that leads to their defeat. Valorous speaks low and formal, the way one addresses a sovereign crisis. The words carry the Emperor's gravity, sacred ground, unpermitted presence, the demand to withdraw. Lyra watches Immortus tilt his head slightly, not in mockery, but in the quiet attention of someone evaluating a familiar variable. There is no anger in the response that comes. The tone is almost respectful, as though the custodes represent an old constant worth acknowledging even while being bypassed. Immortus does not deny the sanctity of Terra. He denies its stability. The emphasis falls not on invasion, but on inevitability. Valorous, for all his discipline, is forced into a new posture, one in which he must calculate against a man who treats time as terrain. The custodes have trained for every enemy the galaxy can produce, but no training prepares for an adversary who may have already witnessed their training fail. Around them, the sanctum grows heavy with a quiet that feels like pressure at the back of Lyra's skull. The machine spirits in the surrounding systems are silent now, not because they have been shut down, but because they do not know which second they occupy. Lyra can sense the palace's time lattice bending around Immortus the way metal bends around a magnet, subtle but undeniable. It is as if reality itself is waiting to see which authority it should serve. The standoff locks into place, and Lyra feels the fracture widen in the Imperium's soul. The custodes are the last pure blade of the Emperor's sovereignty. If even they hesitate, then Terra's certainty is cracking. She sees a truth forming in their stillness. This confrontation is not about who holds the stronger weapon. It is about who holds the stronger claim on what comes next. The sanctum becomes a threshold between futures, and Lyra stands at its edge, sensing that a test is about to begin, one that will decide whether the Imperium can still define its own tomorrow. Valorous moves before Lyra can register the breath that precedes the strike. The Guardian spear drives forward with a speed that has ended rebellions and slayed horrors across 10 millennia, its tip aimed for the center of Immortus's chest. The moment should be decisive, a perfect imperial answer to intrusion. Instead, the world slips sideways in a way Lyra's augmetics struggle to narrate. Immortus does not dodge like a warrior. The form simply shifts by a fraction of sequence, stepping half a heartbeat forward in time, leaving the spear to pass through the space where his body used to be. The motion is too clean to be trickery. There is none of the warp's distortion, none of the psychic haze that accompanies sorcery. It is a mechanical correction, a temporal displacement so minor that the eye barely catches it, yet so absolute that the attack becomes meaningless. Lyra's chronoarchives, tuned to track microvariants, register the displacement with a wave of error that erupts like static in her skull. Before, after. The strike missed because the target moved to a moment that obeyed a different arrangement of before and after. Valorous pivots into a second thrust, then a third, spearwork smooth as a machine hymn. Each time, Immortus slips between instants like a blade sliding between armor plates. There is no hurry in the intruder's posture, no panting effort, only the calm inevitability of someone walking through options already measured. Lyra feels a sickening respect form behind her fear. The custodes represent the height of human martial perfection, but perfection cannot land a blow on a man who treats time as a corridor he can step along at will. Then the battle changes without warning. Immortus lifts a hand, not in a gesture of force, but in a gesture of decision. The sanctum freezes, not a collapse of machinery, not a psychic stun, but a suspension of the second itself. Lyra feels her body lock in place, her augmetics scream in mute contradiction, and the incense in the air halts as if it has become stone. The custodes stand mid-step, golden statues trapped inside their own momentum. The palace's lights do not flicker, they hold in absolute stillness, as though the universe has paused to listen. Within that single-held breath, something enters Lyra's mind, not as a psychic invasion, but as a forced window. The time-stream spills open in front of her, a layered procession of possible terras. In one future, the imperial palace burns under a tide of chaos that arrived too early. In another, the Astronomicon dies, and humanity's fleets drift blind until they starve. In others, civil schism splits Terra, and the Immaterium devours itself without an external enemy needing to strike. The images do not roar, they unfold coldly, like data sheets laid across her consciousness. She sees 100 endings, their differences in detail, but their outcome the same: collapse, loss, extinction. Valorous sees them too. Lyra can tell by the slightest tremor in the Captain General's posture, by the way his spear quivers in his frozen grip. The custodes are not weak enough to be frightened by death, but they are disciplined enough to recognize an extinction curve when it is placed before them. Time holds them in that knowledge for one breath, then releases them back into motion. The sanctum lurches forward again. The incense falls. The lights resume their flicker. Valorous lands where the strike would have ended a lesser opponent and finds empty air. Immortus stands a pace away, untouched. The words come steady and low, not triumph, not threat, but the same diagnostic calm that has marked every sentence since arrival. Death is unnecessary, compliance is required. The meaning settles like ash, and for the first time Lyra sees the true battlefield. It is not the sanctum floor, not the spear's arc, not even Tarot itself. It is the future, and Immortus is already standing inside it. Lyra feels her throat tighten as the standoff reforms around this new truth. The custodes have met an enemy they cannot strike by strength alone. The Immaterium has been shown endings it cannot unsee. The breath she draws now is slower, heavier, carrying the awareness that the next choices made in the sanctum will echo far beyond any duel of steel, into the shape of history itself. The sanctum does not return to normal after the duel. It hardens into a new kind of silence. The custodes fall back into their line, not in retreat, but in recalibration, each golden figure holding a posture that has outlasted ages. now forced to contend with a threat that cannot be met by blade alone. Immortus remains where he stood, not pressing forward, not withdrawing, simply existing inside the palace as if the concept of permission has become irrelevant. The imperial palace has survived wars that tore continents apart, but this is a war without visible fire, a siege with no battering rams. The battleground is sequence, and the siege engine is certainty. Days pass and the palace becomes a silent battlefield. Orders are drafted, countered, drafted again. In the senatorum's chambers, high lords argue by candlelight and cogitator glow, each decree struggling to take shape, because every plan is already haunted by its own failure. Tactical briefings begin with confidence, then collapse as chronometric forecasts void themselves in contradiction. An admiral demands a firing solution and sees the prediction algorithm return three outcomes that cannot exist together. A general enters a war room prepared to announce a strike and finds the target already moved in ways no scout reported. The Immaterium is still armed, still vast, still violent by necessity, yet the machinery of response falters, feeling outplayed not by a fleet, but by tomorrow. Lyra watches these failures cascade through the chrono archives like a slow contagion. She sees data slates rewriting their own timestamps a moment after being sealed. She sees servitors in the palace's nerve corridors pause and reboot endlessly, caught in loops of instruction that no longer align with the minute they are supposed to obey. She hears tech priests whisper binary prayers for stabilization, and hears their prayers return as meaningless noise, because the error is not a broken circuit, it is a broken order of events. Every attempt to bring the palace into a single rhythm is met by a subtle warping of rhythm itself. The Officio Assassinorum makes its move on the second day. The temple operatives do not announce an approach. They do not miss. They vanish. One moment Lyra's augmetic feeds register their deployment route through shadowed service tunnels. The next, those same feeds show an empty corridor that seems to have never contained movement. The palace security logs present no intrusion, only a gap, a shut door in sequence where a footstep should exist. When traces are sought, there are none, not even blood. The assassins have not been killed in any way Lyra knows how to measure. They have been folded out of the line that led them here, snared by a paradox so clean it leaves no residue. More attempts follow, each one eroding confidence further. A Vindicare sightline collapses into a sudden blind spot a fraction of a second before a shot could be taken. A Calidus operative reaches for a kill that has been rehearsed 1,000 times and finds the order of entry reversed, a corridor relocated in time beyond recognition. Even the most precise killers in the Immaterium are reduced to ghosts of intent, their failures sealed before they become action. The fact of it spreads through the palace faster than any official report, thickening the air with dread. Lyra is not immune to that dread, but she is disciplined enough to examine it. She records each anomaly and sees the same signature beneath them. Immortus does not respond to assaults. He prevents their successful version from existing. The palace is learning a new rule of survival, one that says violence only matters if it can enter the future intact. The result is a paralysis deeper than fear. It is not that the Immaterium cannot strike. It is that it cannot find a strike that has not already been undone by knowledge. In the corridors, she hears soldiers mutter that the intruder is a curse. In Mechanicus enclaves, adepts whisper that the Omnissiah has been challenged by an alien logic. Lyra keeps her face still and her hands steady, yet inside her the palace's silence becomes an echoing chamber. If every road toward resistance is already a road toward failure, then the standoff is no longer a pause before war. It is the slow realization that the Immaterium is standing on the edge of a future it does not control, and waiting to see whether it will be allowed to step forward at all. On the fourth day, the palace receives a different kind of report, not a warning, not a casualty tally, but a contradiction that arrives in the language of relief. A void shield network in the northern hemisphere, one of Terra's most ancient defensive arteries, has been failing in a pattern so predictable that the Mechanicus had resigned itself to gradual collapse. The decay traced back through centuries of component fatigue, ritualized patchwork, and the inevitable entropy of machines too old to be fully understood. Repair estimates were measured in years, resources, and sacrifice. Yet in a single night cycle, the network stabilizes. Output returns to full integrity. The drift vanishes as if it had never been written into the line of history that led to failure. Lyra feels the shift before the data arrives. Her chronoarchives register a smoothing in the temporal lattice, a correction in the order of causal descent. When she accesses the report, the truth is there, laid out in stark metrics. No unauthorized labor logged, no replacement shipments recorded, no Forge World convoys inbound. The sequence of events that caused the decay has been rewritten. The shield remains the same physical machine, but its story is altered. Stress fractures that should have formed decades ago never did. Maintenance rights that should have been delayed by bureaucratic bottlenecks occurred on time. A marginal calibration error in the early millennia of its service was corrected retroactively, erasing the cascade of later failure. The network did not get fixed, it got edited. The second act follows quickly. In the underlayers of Terra's hive sprawl, a hidden cult is discovered and neutralized before a single uprising begins. The Inquisition had long suspected something parasitic in those districts, a slow-growing node of corruption that might one day surface as a full heretical bloom. But investigations had found nothing, and the darkness of Terra can hide 1,000 sins. Now the node is gone, not raided, not purged by fire and blade, but removed at the root. The report states something that makes Lyra's augmetic stutter. The cult's founding meeting never occurred. The key preacher never arrived at the rendezvous point. The stolen relic that would have ignited their doctrine never left its vault. The future in which the cult existed has been trimmed away so cleanly that no one in that district remembers the wrong path that was almost taken. Word spreads that the intruder has prevented disaster. Some cadres call it intervention, others call it trespass. Lyra experiences it as a pattern made visible. The acts are not random kindness. They are strategic edits designed to demonstrate a principle rather than win a battle. Immortus is teaching Terra what control of sequence looks like, and doing so through examples that translate into survival. A collapsing shield restored without a wrench, a heresy annihilated without a shot. These are miracles by any imperial definition, yet the data beneath them is consistent, elegant, and terrifyingly practical. Her mind returns to the sanctum, to the way time paused under Immortus's hand. The same calm certainty lives in these interventions, the same refusal to engage in messy conquest. This is not the posture of a conqueror who seeks territory. It is the posture of a curator who seeks to correct history's flaws. By choosing targets that matter to Terra's safety, Immortus avoids appearing as a destroyer. By choosing methods that leave no blood, the intruder avoids provoking the kind of visceral hatred that rallies empires to war. Instead, he provokes dependency and awe, the twin forces that make empires kneel without realizing they have done so. Lyra feels the danger of that awe in herself. The Mechanicus is trained to revere function. When a device performs what should be impossible, reverence awakens before doctrine can restrain it. She resists the instinct, not by denial, but by analysis. The edits are proof of capability. Capability is not virtue. The same hand that rewrote a Void Shield's decay could rewrite a fleet's loyalty. The same method that erased a cult's birth could erase a political rival's rise. Editing the past to save the present is indistinguishable from editing the past to rule it. The line is defined only by the mind holding the pen. As she records the sequence alterations into her sealed logs, Lyra hears the palace growing louder with whispers, not of war, but of hope. Hope is a subtle weapon, and this stranger wields it like a scalpel. She keeps her breathing slow, her thoughts precise, and allows herself one sober conclusion. Salvation delivered through precision can be the most persuasive kind of domination because it feels like rescue rather than conquest. That truth settles over her as the next days approach, and the Imperium's soul begins to split along the seams Immortus has quietly exposed. The Imperium has always been a mosaic held together by necessity. Its unity is sacred, but it is also fragile, a web of institutions that agree on survival even when they disagree on meaning. Immortus's precision edits do not merely stabilize machines and erase cults, they illuminate those disagreements like a torch inside a vault. After the interventions, lines begin to form not on battlefields, but in conversations, in glances, in the subtle drift of allegiance. Within the Adeptus Mechanicus, the fracture is sharpest. Senior tech priests and fabricator locums arrive at the Chrono Archives to study Lyra's logs firsthand, their mechadendrites jittering with a hunger they seldom display openly. For millennia, Mars has preserved relics and whispered rites over them, but progress has been chained by fear of repeating the disasters of the Dark Age. Now a stranger has demonstrated mastery over causal engineering, a discipline the Mechanicus never dared name. Some adepts see blasphemy, others see revelation. Their binary cant grows heated, less hymn and more argument. The intruder's methods are forbidden by doctrine, yet the results align with the Mechanicus's oldest purpose, to reclaim humanity's lost greatness. Lyra senses the temptation blossoming in their voices, the belief that perhaps the Omnissiah has sent a different kind of messenger. Rogue traders respond with their customary pragmatism. In the gilded halls of their envoys on Terra, they speak quietly of supply chains unbroken by war, of new routes cleared before threats emerge, of schedules aligned with futures that contain profit rather than ruin. Administratum functionaries, often mocked for their labyrinthine caution, find themselves drawn toward the calm efficiency Immortus embodies. A timeline ruler could dissolve the paperwork of survival into something clean. A hand that prunes disasters before they grow is a hand that promises stability. They do not worship, but they bargain in their minds, trading sovereignty for certainty. Opposition gathers with equal intensity. The Adeptus Custodes do not bend. Their role is to defend the Emperor, and the Emperor's sovereignty is not a variable to negotiate. Each Golden Guardian has already seen the possible futures Immortus displayed, yet duty teaches them a bitter lesson, that survival purchased by surrender is not survival at all. The Sisters of Silence, with their psychic nullity, patrol closer to the inner palace, creating pockets of dead calm in which Immortus's temporal presence feels slightly less absolute. Their silence is a different kind of statement, one that says the Imperium will not allow its deepest sanctum to become another edited chapter. The ecclesiarchy reacts with flame. Cardinals and confessors fill cathedrals with sermons that frame the intruder as an assault on the Emperor's divine plan. Their language is absolute because the price of doubt is collapse of faith itself. If time is handed to a stranger, then faith becomes irrelevant, and the ecclesiarchy cannot survive irrelevance. Puritan inquisitors share that instinct. Their danger sensory is built for heresy, and Immortus's very existence is a heresy beyond classification. They prepare edicts of excommunication not because they believe they can kill him, but because ideology demands that a line be spoken aloud. Lyra stands between these moving plates, feeling the ground beneath her shift. The conflict is no longer about the intruder's power. That power has already been demonstrated. The conflict is about what humanity becomes if it accepts the terms attached to it. In the Chrono Archives, she hears Mechanicus adepts talk of advancement without uncertainty. In the Sanctum corridors, she hears custodes vow to die before surrendering the Emperor's future. In the plazas outside, she hears citizens whispering that the stranger's name tastes like rescue. Each faction insists it acts for humanity's sake, and each is partly honest. The Mechanicus fears stagnation more than domination. The ecclesiarchy fears the loss of meaning more than extinction. The custodes fear betrayal of duty more than death. Their fears form a tangled knot, and Immortus stands at the center of it like a surgeon who understands that the patient's body will fight the cure even when the cure is real. Lyra's own mind becomes a battlefield of competing loyalties. Her oath is to the Omnissiah, to the preservation of knowledge and the safety of Terra's systems. Yet knowledge without agency is a cage. A pruned future may survive, but who decides which branches are cut and which lives are allowed to grow? She feels the question throb under every conversation now, shaping the schism with quiet inevitability. Is survival worth surrendering freedom to a ruler of timelines, or is freedom worth the risk of dying in a future that remains human because it is chosen by humans? The question is not spoken in a single voice, but it echoes through the palace as if the walls themselves are beginning to ask it, and Lyra senses that a test is coming that will force the Immaterium to answer. The galaxy does not wait while Terra debates. As the schism thickens, a new alarm rises from the outer defense lattice near Luna, sharp and familiar, a note the Immaterium has learned to dread. Warp turbulence swells into a breach at the moon's shadowed orbit, not a minor tear but a blooming wound, wide enough to pour a legion through. The Immaterium's light stains the void in colors that make mortal eyes ache, and void-hardened augurs detect the vital signature of demonic emergence. This is the kind of incursion that has consumed worlds whole, the kind meant to arrive when a civilization is weakest. Imperial defenses react, but not fast enough. Fleet elements mustering from Saturn's shipyards are delayed by command disputes. Navigators are still shaken by temporal dissonance. Machine spirits in some defense clusters remain half out of rhythm. The palace sends orders, Mars sends counterorders, and the gap between them becomes the space where demons begin to form. Lyra watches the tactical feeds from her archive terminals, feeling the old dread return, the dread of the warp's hunger. She has seen the Immaterium survive this before, but survival always costs millions, sometimes billions. Now, with internal unity already fractured, the cost could be worse. Immortus does not wait for consensus. The sanctum doors open and the intruder moves, not toward a throne, not toward a faction council, but toward the breach itself as though it were a scheduled appointment. There is no escort, no battle hymn, no declaration of crusade. The posture remains calm, the forever crystal held steady. Lyra follows at a distance, more witness than participant, her augmetics struggling to track a path that does not obey normal continuity. Steps cross a corridor, then another, yet the distance between chambers collapses as if folded. Time stutters ripple around the armored figure, and each stutter carries him closer to Luna's orbit without a shuttle, without a warp jump, without any visible mechanism the Immaterium recognizes. In the void near the breach, the demons begin to coalesce. Their forms are not yet fully anchored in real space, still half-whispered dream, half-nightmare flesh. A host of pale fire and taloned shadow reaches outward, searching for the psychic resonance of terror to feast upon. But before the first fully manifests, Immortus arrives within the fracture's threshold, not charging into battle, but stepping into the moment before the battle becomes inevitable. Lyra sees what happens through layered tactical feeds and her own temporal sensors. The intruder does not strike the demons as targets. He strikes the cause that allows them to exist. The forever crystal flares with a cold light, and sequence snaps into alignment under his will. The strongest causal anchor in the breach, a convergence of fear, psychic unrest, and warp surge, is isolated, then undone. One key moment in the breach's birth is removed. A ritual signal from the warp that should have locked the portal open never completes. A tidal surge of immaterial energy is diverted into emptiness between instants. The demons, robbed of the step that would have made them real, unravel back into the warp like smoke drawn into a sealed chamber. The breach folds inward, sealing as quickly as it rose. No barrage of macro cannons, no fleets trading fire in orbit, no screaming exorcisms. The void simply returns to silence, leaving only static where a war should have burned. Lyra feels the temporal lattice smooth over the scar with almost gentle precision, and her augmetics record the signature of an edit rather than a victory. Terra lives, Luna's orbit remains clear. The Emperor's light continues to pulse across the Astronomicon, yet the silence that follows is heavier than celebration. The Imperium did not repel the warp by its own doctrines. It was rescued by a stranger who treated demonic incursion as a technical flaw to be corrected before it could mature. Lyra feels both awe and alarm in the same breath. The act is proof beyond dispute. Immortus is not merely predicting futures. Immortus is pruning threats from the root. The implications land like a slow tide inside the palace, and the schism deepens under the weight of a salvation no one asked for and almost no one can deny. News of the breach's collapse spreads across Terra faster than any formal proclamation. It moves through voxcasts, through Mechanicus data links, through the murmured prayer lines of the ecclesiarchy, through the low-market chatter of underhive tunnels. In every version of the story, one fact remains constant. A stranger stood between Terra and an extinction that should have cost oceans of blood, and the extinction never happened. The Imperium has long survived by suffering through its wars. This time it survived by skipping the war entirely. The difference is a shock to the soul. Billions process that shock in their own languages. In noble spires, aristocrats speak of a savior who arrives already holding the future. In manufactorums, workers mutter that the emperor has finally sent a hand to lift the weight of endless labor. In the underhives, people trade half-frightened jokes about a timeless lord who might erase hunger the way he erased a cult. Even the most devout cannot prevent their imaginations from reaching for the word rescue. The Imperium is a civilization built on myth, and myth forms wherever terror meets wonder. Some call Immortus heretic. Those voices come sharp from the pulpits, warning that salvation without the Emperor is a lie. Confessors describe the stranger as a trap dressed in light, an enemy who seeks to steal the sacred right to endure suffering in the Emperor's name. Puritan inquisitors echo the judgment in colder tones, warning that a foe who rewrites sequence is more dangerous than any demon, because a demon kills bodies while a timeline ruler can kill meaning. Yet those condemnations struggle to drown out the simpler instinct rising in the populace. Survival feels wholly regardless of its source, and people who have lived their entire lives within a dying empire are hungry for a sign that dying is not inevitable. Lyra hears that hunger when she walks the palace corridors. She hears it in the way servitors are watched with new curiosity, as if even the dullest machine might now contain potential not yet spoken. She hears it in the way junior adepts whisper about causality, as if it were a newly discovered right. She sees citizens kneeling in small shrine circles, not to Immortus, not yet, but to the idea that someone might finally be able to lift the Imperium out of its endless recursion. Hope is becoming a pressure system, gathering strength by feeding on the relief of a world that thought it was alone. The palace itself feels altered by that pressure. Trajan Valorous remains at his post, spear grounded with perfect resolve, but Lyra notices a subtle tightening in the custods' collective vigilance. They know what hope can do. It can soften loyalty, make people accept arrangements that would otherwise feel unthinkable. The ecclesiarchy knows it too, which is why sermons grow more urgent, more absolute, more filled with fire against temporal blasphemy. The Mechanicus, divided already, tilts further toward fascination. When a system that should have failed survives because a stranger edits its origin, it is difficult for a tech priest not to wonder what else might be saved, or by what methods. Lyra feels the danger in her own chest like a low drum. She is trained to value function, and function has been demonstrated on a godlike scale. A part of her understands why citizens whisper a new name with reverence. The Imperium has lived for millennia under the rule of a silent corpse on a throne, surviving by inertia and sacrifice. Now a living will has arrived, offering survival not as a distant promise, but as a practical outcome. That contrast is seductive in ways doctrine cannot fully guard against. Hope makes empires bend because hope makes fear negotiable. fear that once anchored obedience begins to loosen. Citizens who feared chaos more than tyranny begin to fear stagnation more than surrender. In such a climate, a timeline ruler does not need to conquer the palace by force. The populace can tilt the future toward him through longing alone. Lyra realizes that the greatest threat Immortus poses may not be the forever crystal, but the quiet transformation of Terra's imagination. A civilization that learns someone can rescue it from its own darkest hour may begin to believe it cannot rescue itself at all. She returns to the chronoarchives with that thought heavy behind her eyes, sensing the next phase approaching like a tide. The Immaterium is splitting in hallways, in temples, in data vaults, not yet by civil war, but by a slow inward leaning toward a promise too potent to ignore. Lyra feels herself standing at the center of that line, and she knows with calm certainty that what comes next will not be decided only by power, but by what humanity is willing to become in order to keep living. The breach near Luna fades into memory, but its absence leaves a different kind of scar. Terra's skies are clear, the warp quiet for the moment, yet Lyra feels something unsettled behind the calm, like the pause after a bell that still vibrates in the bone. In the chrono archives, the temporal lattice never fully returns to its old cadence. It stabilizes, yes, but with a subtle tension braided into every second, a pressure that was not present before Immortus arrived. The palace clocks stay aligned, yet the alignment feels imposed rather than natural, as if a new gravity has entered the system and time is quietly rearranging itself around it. Lyra does what she always does when intuition rises. She measures it. Her augmetics cross-reference planetary chronometers with Martian time vaults, with naval atomic standards, with the deep pulse of the Astronomicon. She expects to find minute drift, the kind that follows any major warp disturbance. Instead, she finds a different signature entirely. The time stream around Sol is rippling outward in concentric layers, not random warp turbulence, but a structured aftershock, like a stone dropped into an ocean of causality. Each ripple carries the same mark, a temporal resonance bound to the forever crystal's presence on Terra. It is subtle enough that most imperial systems cannot perceive it, but Lyra's implants were built for the smallest fractures in sequence, and now they read the fracture as it spreads. The first credible warning arrives from the system's edge. In the outermost auger stations beyond Neptune, sensor arrays detect vessels breaching into real space without warp transition. The stations report no empiric flare, no translation swell, no familiar taste of the Immaterium. Instead, the ships appear like facts inserted into the void. Their profiles are wrong for any known Xenos configuration, smooth in ways that defy imperial construction logic, laced with geometries that make targeting cogitators fail to agree on their silhouette. Their hulls shimmer at the corner of perception, as if they are not fully committed to one moment or one angle of existence. The Outer Fleet commanders request identification from Mars, from Terra, from any registry that might anchor the shapes to a category. None can. The ships do not answer hails. They do not make threats. They do not deploy troops. Their movement is precise and cold, oriented not toward conquest, but toward a single vector line leading inward, toward Terra's chronometric heart. Lyra watches the feeds and feels the meaning settle into place. These are not Chaos Raiders responding to weakness, not Orc Hulks smelling blood, not the sleek predation of the Eldari. The behavior is too clean, too indifferent. They move as instruments of correction, temporal predators drawn by the rupture Immortus represents, by the forever crystal's afterimage in the timestream. Their interest is not humanity, not Terra, not any victory in the Imperium's wars. Their interest is the anomaly at the center, a foreign variable that does not belong in this reality's unfolding. Across the palace, fear takes a different form than it did during the warp breach. This is not fear of a battle that can be fought. It is fear of being incidental to a conflict that exists above imperial comprehension. Lyra sees the same dread in the Mechanicus adepts leaning over her data, in the custodes who hold the inner gates, in the inquisitors who feel their doctrines thinning under pressure. If these hunters are here for Immortus alone, they will not hesitate to erase anything in their path. Terra sits between them and their quarry. The aftershocks in the time stream grow sharper as the fleet advances. Lyra's augmetics pick up micro-reversals of causality in distant sensors, tiny pockets where a second repeats, then corrects, as if reality is preparing itself for further surgery. She feels her mouth go dry, not from panic, but from the scale of the threat forming beyond the system's rim. An enemy that does not hate you is sometimes worse than one that does, because indifference has no mercy. The hunters are coming, and Terra may be collateral in a war over time itself, a truth that settles over Lyra with quiet inevitability as the palace moves toward its next decision. The imperial response begins the way all imperial responses begin, with councils, with rituals of confirmation, with chains of authority tightening around themselves even as the danger closes in. High Lords demand verification, the Inquisition demands proof of intent, the Navy demands fire authorization. Each faction argues for its own doctrine of defense, and in those arguments Lyra hears the same old rhythm of delay. The Immaterium is vast, and that vastness means its decisions travel like glaciers, slow and unstoppable, but never quick enough for threats that arrive like lightning. Immortus does not wait for that rhythm. Lyra finds the intruder in the outer sanctum, still as ever, studying the approaching fleet through projections that no imperial conduit has willingly granted. The posture is less like a man preparing to flee, more like a mathematician adjusting a proof. When the voice comes, it is calm, certain, threaded with the same diagnostic clarity that has marked every act so far. The hunters have locked onto the forever crystal's signature. They will follow it to Terra whether the Immaterium is ready or not. If they reach the throne world in full strength, their method of correction will break reality in ways no void shield can contain. Lyra expects him to prepare a defense here, to seize more systems, to turn Terra into a fortress around his presence. Instead, the next movement is simple, almost quiet. Immortus steps toward a stretch of open air within the sanctum, and for a breath the space seems to deepen, as if the room has revealed a hidden corridor in its own timeline. There is no rift, no tear in the sky, no wound in reality. The world does not flare or howl. A prepared time corridor unfolds like a door that has always existed, and Immortus passes through it as easily as a man crossing a threshold. Lyra feels the corridor's wake brush her augmetics like cold wind. The temporal lattice registers a clean trajectory line leading away from Terra, a route carved in sequence rather than space. She follows not by choice yet, but by necessity of witness. The corridor delivers them into a high void platform already aligned to Mars, far faster than any Imperial transit, yet without the warp signature. It feels as though distance has been edited in their favor. When the intruder turns back to her, the words come steady and low. The hunters will pursue his signature. That pursuit can be used. Terra cannot be the battlefield because the hunters do not care what they break to reach their objective. Mars, however, is different. Ancient forged shields and deep planetary defenses sit there in layered redundancies that can survive the collateral of temporal weaponry longer than Terra's inhabited sprawl. If the hunters must be faced, they should be faced above a world designed for industrial sacrifice, not above humanity's holy cradle. He requires access to sealed chronotech vaults on Mars, repositories of forbidden devices the Mechanicus has kept shuttered since the Dark Age. With such a device, a stronger temporal lure can be projected, a phantom signature that draws the hunters away from Terra's orbit and into a controlled trap. The plan is clean, ruthless, and logical. It also requires heresy, because nothing sealed by the Martian conclaves is opened without sanction, and no sanction will come before the hunters arrive. Lyra listens and feels two truths settle together. First, that the Imperium's councils will not move fast enough. Second, that Immortus has already accepted that fact and built his strategy around it. He is not asking Terra for permission to be saved. He is informing Terra of the method by which it will be saved, whether it approves or not. The corridor behind them closes without drama, leaving only the voids quiet and the distant red of Mars rising like a wound in the stars. Lyra senses the palace shrinking behind her, not physically, but in relevance. The battle for Terra is about to be fought somewhere else, under rules the Imperium has never written. Her breath slows as the implication settles, and she realizes that the next step will not be taken by armies, but by her own hand, a soft, inevitable handoff into the hardest choice of her life. The request lands inside Lyra like a weight that her augmetics cannot dilute. Access to the sealed chronotech vaults is not a procedural inconvenience, it is a spiritual boundary line that defines the Mechanicus's survival. The vaults are locked because humanity once climbed too high and nearly shattered itself. Every chancellor adept swears to preserve knowledge while restraining its most catastrophic forms. Those vows are not metaphors. They are enforced by memory implants, by ritual scars, by the quiet threat of excommunication from one's own order. Lyra stands on the void platform, with Mars filling more of the viewport each minute, and feels the full breadth of that oath press against her ribs. Giving access would make her a heretic by definition. It would place her outside the sacred chain that has guided her entire existence. Yet refusing is not a clean act of loyalty. Refusing means leaving Terra to be struck by hunters whose weapons do not discriminate. It means accepting that billions may die so that a vow remains unbroken. The logic of that exchange is brutal, and Lyra's mind, trained for cold calculation, refuses to pretend otherwise. She reaches for doctrine first, because doctrine is the Mechanicus compass when emotion threatens to cloud reason. The vaults of Moravik were sealed by Martian decree. Unauthorized access risks catastrophic misuse. The conclaves must authorize any awakening. Her internal catechisms repeat these lines with the soothing certainty of a hymn, but hymns are built for stable worlds, and this world is not stable. In the Chrono archives, she saw a Void Shield's history rewritten to prevent collapse. She watched a cult's birth removed from sequence. She watched a warp breach seal before war began. Each act proved that the intruder can perform what the Imperium cannot. The question is no longer whether the intruder's methods are heretical. The question is whether heresy is a meaningful category when existence itself is on the edge of being pruned. Immortus waits without urgency. The stillness is not patience for her sake, but confidence that the calculus allows only one rational outcome. When the voice comes, it is neither harsh nor pleading. Oaths mean nothing if the Imperium dies. The sentence lands like a blade slipped between ribs because it is true in the same way a theorem is true. A vow cannot protect a civilization that no longer exists to keep it. Lyra's augmetics simulate possibilities. In one branch she refuses. Hunters reach Terra. The palace fractures under forces no defense grid can categorize. The Emperor's cradle becomes collateral, and the Mechanicus's purity remains intact only as ash. In another branch she complies. The vault opens under emergency protocol. Terra survives. She is condemned by some, perhaps executed, perhaps elevated into legend. Either way, the Imperium continues, and the Mechanicus retains the chance to define its future rather than lose it. The choice becomes clear not because emotion fades, but because reason aligns with survival. Lyra recites the emergency custodianship codes that live in her highest encryption layer, codes she has never spoken aloud. The act feels like stepping over a boundary that has shaped her entire identity. It also feels like dragging a locked door open so that humanity can breathe. Still, compliance is not surrender. Lyra makes the second decision within the first. She will go with Immortus, not as acolyte, not as convert, as witness, and as restraint if restraint can be found. The vaults contain dangers the intruder may underestimate or may choose to misuse in ways Terra cannot anticipate. her knowledge of their nature might be the only thin guardrail between salvation and catastrophe. Mars draws closer, red and ancient, a world built on the bones of forbidden wonders. Lyra feels her vow fracture into a new shape, no longer blind obedience to seal and ritual, but a deeper loyalty to humanity's continuance. The decision settles in her like iron cooling into place, and with it comes the quiet, grim knowledge that once the vault door opens, neither she nor the Immaterium will ever return to the innocence of believing time belongs only to God and Emperor. They reach Mars in a span that would have been impossible for any Imperial craft, yet the journey leaves no warp taste in Lyra's throat. One moment the red planet is a distant ember, the next its rusted continents fill the canopy, and the void platform eases into a descent corridor that does not exist on Martian charts. Immortus guides the approach with the same calm inevitability that has shaped every move so far, and Lyra watches Olympus Mons drift far to the north, its forged superstructures glowing faintly through atmospheric haze. The intruder avoids populated sectors. The course angles toward the southern polar wastes, a desolate stretch of iron desert where only the highest Mechanicus surveys record what lies beneath. The landing is quiet, almost reverent. Red dust lifts in slow sheets around the platform, then settles. Nothing greets them but emptiness, a horizon unbroken by towers or shrines. Yet Lyra knows the truth under that emptiness. Moravik lies below, sealed since the earliest centuries of colonization, when Mars still remembered the Dark Age more clearly than it dared admit. She has never been here physically, but the vault schematics were implanted into her cognitive core upon elevation, like a dangerous prayer etched into her nervous system. She steps onto the surface with her armor hissing against thin air. The cold bites even through plating. The silence is vast enough to make her hear her own augmetic heart. Immortus walks ahead without hesitation, stopping at a point indistinguishable from any other until Lyra's internal coordinates align and confirm the marker. The words to open the vault come from her mouth in binary cant, each syllable a key threaded through sacred encryption. The ground shudders with a low groan, not like machinery awakening, but like a world remembering something it wished to forget. A slab of rock reconfigures into a descending pathway, revealing a throat of darkness that has waited millennia for this moment. The descent feels longer than it should. The stairway drops through strata layered with ancient shielding fields and folded geometry, technology so old that even Lyra's augmented databases can only partially translate the warning glyphs carved into their walls. The meaning is unmissable. What lies below was sealed to protect humanity from itself. Light gradually rises from sources that do not match any standard lumens, cold and steady, casting sharp reflections off containment, arrays that stretch farther than her eye can measure. Inside Moravik, relics of the Dark Age stand like sleeping giants. Some hum with restrained energy that makes Lyra's augmetics flinch. Others sit motionless, their ordinary appearance masking catastrophes waiting behind a switch. She sees devices labeled in half-erased tongues, genetic rewriters, stellar extinguishers, cognition matrices designed to birth minds without chains. Each one is a forbidden branch of human ambition frozen in steel and crystal. For a heartbeat, awe presses against her discipline. The Mechanicus has spent 10,000 years scavenging at the edges of lost greatness, and here greatness lies stacked in endless rows, silent and untouched. Immortus does not pause for any of it. His focus is singular. He moves through the vault with the precision of someone who already knows which fragment of history matters and which does not. Lyra follows, forcing her mind to remain narrow, because in Moravik temptation can become madness. She leads him toward the central repository where the temporal amplification device rests, a construct small enough to seem unimpressive until one understands its purpose. A crystalline sphere suspended in a lattice of unknown alloy, designed to magnify and project energy signatures across planetary and orbital distances through pure causal resonance. Lyra recognizes it as a Moravik resonator, a tracking array once used against rogue intelligences during the cybernetic revolt. It can amplify a temporal signature until it echoes across an entire system. In the wrong hands, it could map destinies, hunt anomalies, or rewrite probability itself. In these hands, it will become bait. She explains the security web around it, layered to prevent use by anyone not sanctioned by a full Martian conclave. Immortus listens, then steps closer, treating the safeguards as minor mathematics. His gauntlet interfaces with the lattice, and the vault reacts, turrets emerging, fields snapping into place. The intruder redirects their energy with smooth, economical gestures, turning each defense back into dormancy, as if reminding the machine's spirits of an older allegiance. The resonator begins to glow. Above, Lyra feels the first distant tremor of bombardment as the hunters enter Martian orbit. The vault itself seems to inhale around them. She looks at the sphere and understands the trap taking shape, and the weight of Moravik's forbidden silence pressing against the present. The device is awake, the hunters are near, and Lyra senses the story crossing into its next, most dangerous movement, a soft handoff into a battlefield where time itself will be turned into a weapon. The bombardment starts as a vibration through the vault floor, distant at first, then sharpening into a rhythm of impacts that make dust fall from ancient seams. Lyra feels each strike in her bones, and through her augmetics she hears the Martian crust groan, a world enduring forces it was never meant to face. The hunters above are not searching by sight alone. They are hunting by signature, tracking the resonator's echoes with a precision that ignores geography. Their ships fire in calculated spreads, each impact aimed at a projected temporal reflection of Immortus. The method is chillingly efficient and equally indifferent to collateral. Their weapons are built to lock anomalies into one fixed reality by collapsing quantum potential around them. Used here, they would tear Mars into fractured dimensions, turning vast regions of the Forge world into dead, unreachable timescar. Lyra voices the danger in the only way she knows, measured and low. The vault may not survive a direct hit, and Mars cannot absorb endless temporal collapse without losing the soul of its forges. Immortus does not hurry. His calm remains intact even as the impacts draw closer. The resonator's glow intensifies, its field extending like an invisible net through the planet's crust and into orbit. Multiple phantom signatures bloom across the surface, confusing the hunters, dividing their fire. The trap has already begun, and the hunters are stepping into it with every shot they take. They ascend back to the surface through corridors trembling under stress. The entrance opens onto a landscape of devastation. The red desert is cratered, glassed in places where temporal energy fused sand into brittle mirrors. Above, the hunters maneuver in complex angular patterns, their hulls shimmering as they adjust to the resonator's echoes. More strikes descend, and the air around Lyra tastes metallic, not from smoke, but from reality straining at the seams. Immortus steps into the open as if onto a dais. The forever crystal lifts slightly in his grasp, and Lyra feels the time stream tighten around it, like a bowstring drawn to full tension. The intruder's hands move in patterns her augmetics cannot predict, threading the resonator's field into something more than a lure. The sphere below does not only project signature, it receives. It collects the hunters, temporal collapse beams as they hit the phantom nodes, drawing those beams into its lattice, turning their own mechanism into fuel. The shimmer thickens in the air, a dome of causal distortion expanding outward from Immortus in smooth, accelerating waves. When it touches the impact sites, the energy does not explode. It folds, swallowed into the growing field as if the intruder has provided a new focal point for every collapse. The hunters realize too late. Their ships attempt to withdraw, engines flaring in geometries that ignore conventional thrust, but the field races faster than their correction systems can compute. One vessel is caught, then another, then a chain of them, each engulfed in the expanding dome. Lyra watches with a mixture of awe and dread as the ships begin to distort, they do not break apart with fire. Their hulls fold inward, collapsing along angles that defy Euclidean measure, then vanish from visible space. The moment is not destruction in the imperial sense. It is removal. A pocket of erased time opens like a silent maw, and each hunter is dropped into it, trapped in a place that does not belong to the timeline they came from. The field continues until the last ship is claimed, then contracts back into Immortus and the crystal with final, economical stillness. Silence returns to Mars in a wave. The bombardment ends not because the hunters are beaten, but because they are absent, pruned into a dimensional prison of Immortus's making. Lyra scans the void and finds nothing but clean space. Her augmetics do not register debris because there is none. The enemy has been cut out of the present the way a flaw is cut from a blueprint. The resonator below pulses one final time, sending a superluminal entanglement wave toward Terra. Lyra understands at once. The remaining hunters that continued inbound will be linked to the captured fleet and drawn into the same pocket without a battle. The trap is complete, and the system is saved by a method no imperial doctrine would sanction. She exhales slowly, feeling the Martian cold bite through her armor. Terra is safe again, so is Mars, but the cost is not measured in damage, it is measured in precedent. A stranger has turned time into a battlefield, and one without asking permission. Lyra feels the weight of that victory press into the silence around her, and in that silence she senses the next confrontation approaching, not with hunters this time, but with the Imperium's own soul, a soft, inevitable handoff into the question of what such salvation demands in return. Return to Terra does not feel like victory. The time corridor delivers them back onto the palace's landing thresholds with a smoothness that denies the scale of what has just occurred, as if the universe is determined to pretend nothing changed. Above, the skies are clean, the hunters gone, the astronomic and steady. Yet the air around the imperial palace has a new scent to Lyra, the scent of a world that has been saved by hands it did not sanction. The rings of defenders that once waited to strike are now waiting to interpret, and interpretation is always a slower kind of battle. Immortus moves through the sanctum's inner ways without escort, not because he has seized permission, but because permission has become a small thing in the wake of his demonstration. Custodes watch from their posts, spears grounded and silent. Mechanicus adepts stand half-hidden behind data shrines, their mechadendrites twitching with conflicting impulses of reverence and alarm. Inquisitors observe from the shadows of marble colonnades, eyes narrowed not in fear, but in the cold suspicion of those who sense a threat that cannot yet be named in doctrinal terms. Lyra walks beside the intruder like a witness borne forward by inevitability. The private chamber he chooses is not ornate. It is a modest vault space near the Chrono Archives, a room where the palace stores its most sacred time standards. The selection feels deliberate, a quiet message that the conversation belongs to sequence and its stewardship. The lights here are steady and pale, casting no dramatic flare, and the silence holds the weight of centuries of recorded history. Immortus turns to her with the same calm as ever, and the words come measured, almost respectful. Lyra hears acknowledgement in his tone, the recognition of a mind that did not flinch from logic even when logic demanded heresy. He praises her clarity, her refusal to hide behind ritual when survival hung in balance. The compliment is not warm, but it is precise, and precision has a way of reaching her more deeply than sentiment. Then the offer settles into the room like an iron door closing. Immortus does not frame it as temptation, but as a solution that follows cleanly from the premises they both now share. Terra survives at the edge of collapse. Chaos victories repeat because the Imperium reacts too late. Heresies ignite because the Imperium cannot see their first sparks in time. Humanity bleeds for a future it cannot stabilize. He can stabilize it. Not by replacing the Emperor's dream with something alien, but by repairing the dream's failed execution. He will prune chaos victories before they occur, erasing the moments that allow a black crusade to gather momentum. He will prevent heresies before they ignite, eliminating the critical convergences where betrayal becomes inevitable. He will rebuild humanity by managing its destiny, lifting the Imperium out of an endless recursion loop and setting it on a line that survives. Lyra feels the sharpness of his logic because it matches truths she has spent her life documenting. The Imperium is slow. Its structures are rigid. It is brilliant at enduring, but brittle at evolving. The stranger is naming the same ailment's doom named in another reality, and as before, the diagnosis is painfully accurate. Even her augmetics cannot contest the data behind his claims. She has seen him collapse a warp breach by removing its cause. She has seen him trap temporal predators by turning their own correction tools against them. The possibility of applying such control to the Imperium's daily wars feels like a horizon of relief, so vast it makes her mind momentarily empty. But the price reveals itself in the same breath, because Immortus never hides his premises. In his vision, the Imperium survives because its future is curated by a single will. A timeline cannot be stabilized through competing sovereignties. A recursion cannot be broken if every faction rereads the script differently. The future must be decided alone, by the mind that understands it, by the hand that can prune and graft without hesitation. Immortus becomes the steward of sequence, the arbiter of which branches of humanity are allowed to grow. Terra will not kneel to a throne of gold, but to a throne of time, and in that arrangement, choice becomes a variable cut away for stability's sake. Lyra stands very still as the offer reaches its final shape. The room is quiet enough that she can hear the chrono standards ticking in the walls behind her, each tick a reminder that the Imperium's heartbeat has always been its own. She understands the grandeur of what is proposed. She also understands, with a clarity that hurts, that accepting it would mean trading humanity's soul for a future without pain. The offer hangs between them, massive, elegant, and cold, and Lyra feels the question that has been growing since Immortus first spoke on Terra now narrowing into a single point, a handoff into the moment where she must answer not only for herself, but for what kind of species deserves to endure. Lyra's refusal does not come as a shout. It comes as a steady breath released into the chamber, a decision shaped by sorrow rather than defiance. Her mind does not reject his diagnosis because she has lived inside the Imperium's decay long enough to know its truth. She rejects his cure because the cure demands the one thing the Imperium still possesses even in its ruin, the right to choose itself, even imperfectly. The words come calm and low, guided by the same logic he praised, yet aimed at a different conclusion. A future that survives by removing agency is not a human future. It is a preserved specimen. Immortus watches her without visible reaction. The forever crystal remains in his grasp, held with the same untroubled certainty as ever, but Lyra feels a subtle shift in the air, not anger, not betrayal, something more like recalculation. He speaks again, and the tone is still controlled, still precise. Stability requires a steward. Chaos is not defeated by committees. Humanity has already proven that left to its own course, it bleeds itself into stagnation. He is not offering tyranny, he is offering direction, the way a surgeon offers a knife to cut away infection. Lyra meets that logic with the one truth it cannot absorb. Direction without consent is domination, even when it produces good outcomes. The Emperor's own dream, flawed as its execution became, was still a dream of humanity choosing its path through unity, not through submission to a single mind. If Immortus becomes the sole author of the time stream, then humanity becomes a tool, not a people. She says this in the simplest language she can, because at the heart of the debate there is nothing complex. She would rather risk extinction as a free species than survive as something edited into obedience. The conversation ends without drama. Immortus does not argue further because he is not a man who bargains with premises he considers settled. He turns from the chamber and returns toward the sanctum, moving like a fact re-entering the world. Lyra follows, feeling the palace's breath tighten as the intruder approaches its heart again. The landing platform and outer sanctum fill with a new presence. A coalition has formed while they were gone, driven by fear, gratitude, and the desperate need to reassert sovereignty. Custodes stand in adamantine ranks, their spears bright under the palace lights, eyes fixed on the intruder with the hard serenity of those who would die before yielding the emperor's future. Inquisitors gather beside them, harnesses humming, their purity seals fluttering with quiet authority. Behind those lines, newly arrived Space Marine chapters form a wall of midnight armor and gold filigree, warriors pulled from distant fronts by astropathic alarm, now standing as a final lever of the Imperium's will. Their chapter masters do not posture, they simply wait, weapons held ready but not raised, because they understand that this moment is an ultimatum, not a duel. Lyra steps forward without realizing she has moved. She feels every gaze on her, friend and foe alike, because her presence beside the intruder has already become a symbol. The coalition speaks its demand. Terra acknowledges what Immortus has done, yet denies what he would become if allowed to remain. His presence is no longer required nor permitted. The future of mankind belongs to mankind, however messy its guardianship may be. Immortus surveys them the way he surveyed the hunters above Mars, without contempt, without fear. For a long moment he says nothing, and the palace's silence becomes heavy enough to press into Lyra's chest. She senses the possibility of violence like a storm held behind glass, yet the storm never breaks. The intruder's posture suggests disdain not toward their weapons, but toward the inefficiency of forcing salvation on a civilization unwilling to accept its cost. The words come at last, not as surrender, but as assessment. Terra is not ready. Its people cling to dogma disguised as caution. They mistake stagnation for safety. A future cannot be elevated against its own resistance without wasting the very time he offers to save. Lyra feels the sting of that judgment because part of her recognizes its accuracy, even while refusing its conclusion. She holds her ground anyway. Immortus nods once, a small movement that carries finality. The air around him tightens in a familiar way, folding into a corridor of sequence. There is no spectacle, no flare of rage, no last strike thrown in pride. Time opens like a door and accepts him. The forever crystal's cold light collapses inward, and the intruder steps out of their line without a sound. For an instant, the platform holds nothing but the imprint of his absence, a silence too clean to be natural. The coalition remains in formation, weapons still ready, not because they expect him to return in the next breath, but because they understand what they have just done. They have rejected salvation on his terms. They have chosen ownership of tomorrow, even if tomorrow still bleeds. Lyra stands in the center of that choice, feeling its weight settle into the stones beneath her feet, and sensing the story turning toward aftermath, toward the question of what remains when a timeline ruler departs, leaving behind not conquest, but a mirror that has shown the Imperium its own vulnerabilities too clearly to forget. Terra resumes its routines the way a wounded organism resumes breathing after the blade withdraws. The palace reorders its guard rotations. Vox networks return to normal channels. Chronometers across the throne world gradually find their old cadence again, though Lyra can feel that cadence now carries a faint tremor, like a scar that remembers the cut. Official narratives are drafted with speed bordering on desperation. The High Lords proclaim the intruder banished. The ecclesiarchy declares a trial of faith survived. The Inquisition opens new conclaves to classify what took place. The Mechanicus sends encrypted transmissions to Mars thick with argument and yearning. Every institution tries to fold the event back into doctrine, to make it fit a category that preserves the stability of belief. Yet none of them can erase what the Imperium has now seen. Even in rejection, Immortus forced Terra to confront its own sickness. The schisms that formed during his presence do not vanish with his departure. Mechanicus radicals continue to whisper that causal mastery is humanity's lost birthright. Administratum pragmatists privately mourn the efficiency that slipped away. Custodes and Puritans strengthen their lines, more certain than ever that external salvation is only another form of enslavement. Citizens in the underhives keep repeating his name in quiet corners, not always with reverence, but with memory. The Imperium endures, but it endures in a new posture, aware that another path was offered and refused. Lyra's testimony is required by every faction. She stands before joint councils of red-robed adepts and black-clad inquisitors, her augmetic eye projecting recorded data into the air like cold scripture. She does not embellish. She does not soften. Immortus was a threat because he would have ruled humanity's future alone. Immortus was an opportunity because his diagnosis and his capabilities were real. The Imperium was right to reject a single immutable author of fate. The Imperium would be wrong to pretend the flaws he exploited are not still present. Her measured conclusion leaves the councils uneasy. They want clean verdicts. She gives them balance because balance is all truth allows. When the hearings end, duty tries to pull her back into routine repairs of the chrono-archives, into the comforting neatness of systems that obey. Yet something in her refuses to settle fully into the old cadence. She has stood too close to a power that edits history and survived refusing it. She has felt the seduction of certainty and chosen the burden of agency. That choice has rewired her as surely as any implant. In the quiet of her sanctum, with the palace asleep around her, Lyra reviews her internal logs one last time. She expects to find the residual anomalies of heresy, the echoes of unauthorized sequence. Instead, she finds a file nested inside her deepest augmetic layer, sealed behind encryption she did not install. The signature is subtle, elegant, and unmistakably foreign. A stable causal algorithm, expressed not as a weapon, but as a principle. A method for predicting catastrophe without submitting to one ruler's will, a way to redirect futures through distributed judgment rather than absolute command. Its beauty arrests her breath for a heartbeat. She understands what it is the moment she sees it. Immortus's final act was not a threat, not a prophecy of return, but a seed. He left behind the very possibility she argued for, progress without domination, survival without surrender, a tool that could allow humanity to grow out of recursion by its own hand if it learns to wield it wisely. The contradiction strikes her as profoundly human for a being who claimed to stand above humanity's errors. Perhaps the refusal did not disappoint him as much as he allowed the palace to believe. Perhaps he calculated a different path after all, one that does not require conquest to reach the same horizon. Lyra encrypts the algorithm within her highest vault, not to bury it, but to protect it from unready hands. She begins to study it slowly, testing each line against imperial chronometric theory, against warp-adjacent probability models, against the hard lessons of the Dark Age. She does not rush, because rushing is how humanity once nearly destroyed itself. She does not reject it, because rejection is how humanity stagnates into extinction. She walks the narrow middle path between fear and hunger, between dogma and reckless assent, and in that path she feels something close to hope, not the hope of a savior arriving already winning, but the hope of humanity learning to win without being saved. As dawn rises over Terra's spires, casting long shadows across the palace stones, Lyra stands at the chrono-archives and listens to the restored rhythm of time. It is still imperfect, still burdened by war, still tethered to a fragile empire. Yet now it carries a seed of conscious evolution, a chance to prune disaster through wisdom rather than submission. The Imperium remains wounded, unbowed, and uncertain, but the future is once again in its own hands. Somewhere beyond the stars, Immortus continues his path through ages that do not belong to this reality. Whether he returns as conqueror, ally, or never at all is no longer the heart of the story. The heart is what Terra chooses to do with the gift left in secret, what it chooses to become without surrendering the right to choose. In the grim darkness of the far future, war remains. But within war, within darkness, Lyra knows there is still a quiet, stubborn flame that none can prune away unless humanity offers it first. The right to define its own destiny, even when destiny hurts, even when destiny fails, even when another hand could have made it easier. That flame is imperfect, but it is human, and as long as it burns, the Immaterium story is not finished. It is still being written. If you hunger for more tales of impossible encounters in the dark millennium, smash that subscribe button, and the Emperor protects those who support the channel.